It's the My First Gig podcast, whoa. Sharing stories of first gigs and shows. Comedians sharing their memories. The fun and entertaining, exciting and crazy. With Dwayne Dugan as your host. It's the My First Gig podcast, here we go.
Roy's Keane, oh Roy's Keane, we've never seen a keener window cleaner. Yeah, let's quote Morrissey in the year 2022. That's a thing. Let's not do that. But I could not introduce today's guest without thinking of Roy's Keane, the Morrissey song, inspired by Roy Keane, which Roy Kent, Brett Goldstein's character in Ted Lasso, is inspired by. So look, if I've been mentioning Morrissey, blame it on Brett, and blame it on the fact that this interview was recorded 4 years ago. Jesus, yes, 4 years ago. Oh my God, yes, 4 years ago, back when liking Morrissey was definitely still problematic, but not as bad as today. What are we listening to? Sorry. Hello guys, it's Dwayne, it's me. This is My First Gig, powered by Acast. Hope you are having a lovely, lovely afternoon or morning or evening or life. Or no, not and life. Let's just enjoy our lives. As I said, guest today, Brett Goldstein. It's a real old interview. This was recorded in the Pleasance courtyard, or was it in one of the rooms? I can't remember. It was recorded anyway in a very public place. Arguably the busiest place you'll find in the Edinburgh Fringe, and Brett was doing his show there. Baby Don't Hurt Me, What Is Love? What is love, baby? Don't hurt me. Oh, I've got it wrong. It's been many years, and yeah, we had a lot of observers, passers-by, and workers making noise. But I've basically spent 4 years editing this down to make it sound as good as it can for you. You can hear a little bit, but barely. This is what happens. A lot of my interviews are recorded in comedy spaces, in public places, in your faces, and yeah, I think it did a good job. This is yet another one of the archive interviews that are finally seeing the light of day. Blown up a hard drive, found it again. Here we are, and how nice is it? Should I say? How nice is it of Brett to become a global superstar in the time since I recorded this interview? Now, I was a big fan of Brett, both on screen and on stage at the time of recording. I had known him from being in Derek. He was fantastic in Derek, and I thought, yeah, you know what? Let's go for it. I think this is the guy that needs the My First Gig stamp of approval. And I thought, you know what? I don't want to take credit for all of it. So I'm going to hold the interview back until he's really made it. And then he knows he's done this himself. And, you know, there'll be no second guessing it. And now that he is a Emmy award-winning actor, I can now put this out, you know, humbly and say, congratulations, Brett. I always believed in you. And that's why this has taken so long to come out. Oh, guys, here we are anyway. How are we? Now that we got those introductions done, how are we getting on? Are you doing alright? Did you enjoy last week's episode, Lara Bites? I had a lot of fun with it. Did you? Yeah, I thought it was quite fun. The day that the Lara Bites interview came out, I got on to Mark Maron, who was here in Dublin, and I said, hey, let's do a podcast. And he got back to me, and he was just like, haven't been able to send emails. I'm guessing with like the phone's been abroad and stuff. He goes, sorry, it's too late now. I'm like, no. So if you're listening, go tell Mark Maron that when he's next in Dublin, he needs to make time for the big Dwayne boy. But don't say big Dwayne boy. He won't know what that means. Maybe tag the podcast. Okay. Thank you very much. It's nice. Another late record. Just home from doing a show here in Dublin at Cherry Comedy, the first ever Cherry Comedy All Stars. If you're fans of the Irish comedy circuit, you'll be all too familiar with the acts that we had a triple headline show featuring Deirdre O'Kane, Jarrett Regan, and Michael Fry. And I'm a bit buzzed after that now. I don't want to go to sleep, so it's podcast recording time. You know, it's hard when you come home from a show. Usually they're late at night. And because they're late at night, you wake up late in the day, so you don't want to sleep. And if you can, you won't. You know. Was that a riddle? What's going on? I often lose my mind on these intros, and today is no different. But yeah, just got a bit of that feeling. I am freezing in as well, though, so the adrenaline is being cancelled out by the cold. I'm recording this downstairs, and my girlfriend insists on putting things away. What? Which means that all of my warm jumpers and hoodies and dressing gowns are upstairs in the bedroom where she's sleeping, so I can't go up there and interrupt her. So I'm sitting here with a blanket underneath me, over me. God, I'm going mad. It's the cold. It's the cold and the adrenaline. No, not the cold and the adrenaline. If you take a look at Brett's page on Wikipedia, it makes for some nice reading. It just is like Goldstein was born in Sutton, London, not Dublin. He attended this school, one of the most expensive independent schools in the UK. Look, fair play if you can do it. He went to University of Warwick, studied film, has a podcast about film now. Have you heard it? Films to be buried with? Go over and listen to it. It's very good. All the guests on this podcast, they've definitely been on that. But then it says, briefly after college, he relocated to Marbella to work at a strip club, which his father purchased during a midlife crisis. Oh, see, I read that quick a second ago and I thought he said he went to work at a strip club which his father branded as a midlife crisis, as if to say, oh, our Brett's off, getting his kit off in a strip club. And I was thinking, right, is it often that your father gives commentary on Wikipedia? Because that would be a site I would visit more often. If everyone's Wikipedia page had comments from their father at the end of it, being like, oh, and then Dolly Parton won the Grammy, and he's like, yeah, the song was shit. I'd go there. So never mind. Actually, the point I was making on this doesn't exist. But let's get your dads, if you have a Wikipedia page, just get your dads to edit them, you know? Why not? Get your dads to tweet me. I need friends. But Brett is absolutely killing it right now. Ted Lasso blowing up. I know they're recording new episodes in London as we speak, in time of the year, not so much date, unless they're filming some night scenes, who knows. But one thing I've spotted here is a new TV show that is created by written by Brett, alongside Bill Lawrence and Jason Segel. Apple TV, starring Harrison Ford. That's exciting. Hey, you know what? Turns out, not only do things get good after you're on My First Gig, but it gets even better after we actually release it. So, while I won't take credit for how he's gotten here, I will take credit for everything that happens from now on, while he's at his most popular and still on his rise. You know, that's the My First Gig effect. And yeah, I'm currently reading Bono's book, Surrender. I went to buy it this morning and nobody else was there because it's Dublin and they hate Dublin man Bono. But I'm just looking at the book next to me. It's quite nice. And I realise it's the only opportunity I'll ever have of telling you what I'm reading. That makes me sound kind of cultured, but every book I've ever read has been a autobiography by either a footballer or a musician. And today's no different. And yeah, it's really good. And I might sneak in a few pages. Let's get a few leafs before I go to bed. So I'm going to go do that. I'll check in with you in a little while. But while I'm doing that, how about you sit down and enjoy My First Gig with Brett Goldstein. talk about today. We're at the Pleasance in the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. You're about to do your show for what, day 16, day 15? 17.
Yeah.
How's it been going so far?
It's been going very well. I didn't
what
take a
what
day
is Love
off.
Baby Don't Hurt Me, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, I didn't take a day off this year, and I'm not sure that was wise.
Yeah, like even just one day to reset and realize, okay, it's a Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's
but
midweek.
usually when I have a day off, it's I find it very hard to get started again. So I just thought I'll just plough through.
Yeah, it's mad that you can do something like so frequently, and then one day off can feel like you've taken, you know, the last time you did it was weeks or months ago.
Yeah, I think your body goes, oh, we're done, are we? And then you get ill, and then that's my theory why everyone gets ill in Edinburgh. It's on their day off.
Yeah.
Their body goes, oh, can we relax now? It gives up. Anyway, other than that, it's going great, thanks.
Well, tell me a bit about the show. Has it debuted here, or have you been doing it before the festival?
I previewed it all around, but this is its sort of official.
Okay. And will you stick with us now for maybe next year or so, 18 months, kind of?
Probably for another, if I do a little tour, I'll do it some more, but then I'm already working on a new show.
Okay, so yeah, always one foot forward. How would you describe the current show? And
it is a show about love and sex and porn and addiction, and it is sort of about comes from something that happened in my life, sort of spins off from there. And usually I've done shows that are all kind of true stories, but I've left quite a lot of years before telling the story. Okay. And this is the shortest amount of time between
so it's still fresh, still real, yeah.
Pretty fresh. But I feel like I know what the other ones were maybe too dark, so it had to be enough time to find the funny in them. This one's like, no, I see where the jokes are.
When you finish a show like this, doing it, you know, and you say, especially with no day off, and then you try and look after a month in Edinburgh, and then you look at maybe doing a tour. Yeah. You have to find, I guess, more time then as well, because, you know, you can't... would you take an hour on tour?
You have to make it longer. Oh, that's easy. I mean, it was already too long. I've had to cut loads of stuff for this. So
sure, yeah. Well, I guess
I get to put the other stuff back in.
So you have, so I guess, if you have the other stuff, it's kind of it's a simple process. Yeah. Well, if we go back and kick off now and start talking about your first gig, but like long before your first gig, do you remember, and interpret the word comedy however you wish? Do you remember what your first memory of comedy is?
Good question. I remember the first time. What's my first memory of comedy? My dad was obsessed with the film The Man with Two Brains, Steve Martin, and maybe that was it. Yeah. Because I definitely saw that when I was like 3 or something. Maybe that was the first memory of comedy.
Would you have, gone back and watched that film a bit growing up?
It's fucking brilliant. Yeah. It holds up. Holds up. Lot of, maybe it's a bit too gratuitous boob type film.
For a 3-year-old, certainly, in a way.
But no, I mean, it's about the right time. But it does hold out. Steve Martin, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, a lot of people could stumble across anything in their childhood or even their teens, and you look back, 20 years later or so, and you're like, okay, maybe I won't say that was the one. So Steve Martin's not a bad one to kick off, but yeah. What about a live comedy then? So if we move forward, like actually experiencing comedy,
being there in the room with it rather than listening to recordings.
In the room and seeing it all unfold.
I think it must have been coming to Edinburgh, because I used to come up here when I was quite young. I'd come up here doing plays, and I'll tell you who I really fell in love with. I fell madly in love with was Tony Law. I went to see Tony Law, The Dog of Time, and I was quite young. I don't know how old I was, but I was like, I went to see it maybe 3 times, and I told everyone to go see it. I was like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. And I then met his dog, and I was really like starstruck by him and his dog.
His dog?
Yeah, because he had his dog in the show.
Oh, no way.
And Cartridge Davison was the name of the dog. Sadly no longer with us. And that was it. I think that was the first sort of properly that I was there. I'd listened to like all of Richard Pryor, and I'd listened to I was upset. I had all the tapes of lots of stand-ups, and I used to watch them all on telly. But probably my first live proper there was Tony Law.
And like Steve Martin, it holds up as well.
Yeah, not dissimilar.
You're not too bad now. one would be forgiven for thinking maybe you're remembering that a bit too perfectly, but no, they're nice choices. So yeah, you say that you had tapes and that you were coming up to Edinburgh doing plays. So obviously, roughly what age kind of would that have been? The teenage years? Or? Yeah. So by your teenage years, you had, obviously you're listening to stand-up comedy, you're performing in another fashion. Yeah. So have you always been a performer? I was
always acting and always writing, and I always secretly wanted to be a stand-up, but I never told anyone, and I was too scared. And I did think, it's something that it's like you can't do that. Like that's for.
It's a popular answer is that starting acting because I guess people take, even though it's as tough of a field and a bit of a minefield to. When you're trying to tell people that's what you want to do, it's almost taken a bit more seriously.
Acting, I suppose so. And weirdly, they're both terrible things to say that you want to do. Like if someone says they want to be an actor, I always think, grow up. But even worse, if someone says I want to be a stand-up, I just think, get a job, mate. Like what a pathetic thing to want to do. And I suppose people find there's some like. It's a weird. I think there's a weird thing with stand-ups. Maybe this is a generalization, but I think it's true for a lot of people. Is that somewhere inside there is some belief or some need to do this, but usually we're very insecure and shy and all this stuff. And most people look at stand-up and go, "Oh, well, you must be really arrogant. You must think you're really funny." Yeah. It's like I never thought. It's more of a. I do believe that thing of it's a calling. It's more of a calling than it is a job.
So, at what point did you said you secretly wanted to be a stand-up? Yeah. Was it from watching it or listening to the tapes?
I think it's because I always felt on the outside of everything, as in on the outside looking in. Since I was a little child,
an observer.
I always remember being. Just in a lot of situations, even at school, just thinking, sort of looking around going, what the fuck are we all doing? Like, why is everyone just going along with this? This is so stupid. All of this seems so weird. I think I always had I wasn't part of it. I was always like, this is weird. This is embarrassing, everything. And I remember doing I've never told this story, so this is an exclusive.
Here we go.
What a belter. But I once did we went on a school trip somewhere, and I remember standing up on the coach on the way back to school and doing an impression of the leader who had ever led us on this activity thing and making everyone laugh. And I even remember doing the wanker sign, but I didn't know what it was. I just knew that it was funny, and it got a really big laugh. And I was like, "Yeah, that was probably my first gig."
That was your first gig on the bus. Yeah. So you'd always been performing. You say you're always writing, and then something as simple as standing up on a bus, you go, right, hear that laughter, and it feels good, I guess.
Yeah, it was just, and it was always just fear that stopped me doing it, fear for years and years. And then coming to Edinburgh a lot, and I kept coming up doing plays, and then I watched so much stand-up, and I was like, and the more I watched it, and the more and I met stand-ups and everything, I was like, they are just people. It's just something you have to learn to get good at. And I sort of worked out, this is something that takes years to get good at. You're not just it's very rare to be that person was just born an amazing stand-up.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, so it's also a craft. And
you were no longer, I guess, on the outside as well looking in. You were amongst people who had the same kind of mindset. So
it's I think now I am a stand-up, and knowing stand-ups, it's probably the only time in my life I felt like, these are my people. I've never liked the idea of having being labelled or being in a box. But then once I was with stand-ups, I'm like, if I have to be in a box, it's this one.
Tell me about getting that first gig. I guess so. You knew stand-ups before you tried stand-up.
The first gig I did Logan Murray's comedy course. A friend of mine, I've forgotten this, Andrew Keatley, who is a playwright. I think he sent me an email. I knew nothing about how any of it worked. And he sent me an email for this course, and it was he was like, you should do this. And it was every Sunday. And then at the end, you had to do a gig. It was like a showcase. And I didn't tell anyone I was going to do it. So I was so embarrassed and scared.
Sure.
So I just every Sunday would disappear I think people thought I'd become religious. and I did this course, and then at the end of the course you had to, and I think the course, had its merits and not, but ultimately the best thing about the course is it forced you and set up a gig.
There's a show at the end.
And it was like, you have to, and I kind of knew that. And then, so the whole time you're doing this 10 weeks, you've got this thing like, fuck, in 10 weeks we're doing this. And I do think if that gig, because I'd also said to myself, well, I'll just do the one gig and then I can tell my grandkids I did it and that'll be it. But that first gig was fucking amazing, but purely because of adrenaline and then I was like, okay, this is going to take loads and loads of gigs. It's going to take thousands of gigs. And then I booked myself. I was doing gigs like 3-4 times a week. I knew I had to. And then I died every gig after that for a very long time. But I always had that first gig like, oh, I need to get back to that feeling.
Yeah, claw back to the first thing feeling.
I need to get that first hit.
Tell me about the course. Where was the course?
The course was in Chalk Farm. It was run by Logan Murray. And it was lots of like, I mean, I think it's a certain demographic. You go in there and you go, oh, this is a room full of people who've recently had a breakdown. And it was very, it was sort of terrifying and fun, but, it's a lot of kind of improv games. And it was basically just a series of things to try and force you out of your fear, I suppose.
Sure.
And the reality is, look, at the end of the day, having done it, and now I've done stand-up for 12 years, the only way to really learn stand-up was to do stand-up and go and do gigs. But I will always be grateful to that course for just making me have that first gig. That's the reality of I didn't know how you get gigs. I didn't know you wrote to people. I didn't know you called up clubs. I had literally no idea. I didn't even go to stand-up live in London, so I didn't know how it worked. So purely from a kind of, it helped me practically. Like, this is what you do, and you need to call this person. This is how you hold a mic, stuff like that. You go, okay, great.
If they taught you all of that, so a lot more than just writing and
and then and you had to write a 5-minute set.
So how does a course like that end up? When I guess how do you remember roughly how many people?
Oh well, so here's the stats. So there were, I think, 20 of us.
20 people.
I'm the only one doing stand up from that course.
Sure.
And I think the reality is, it's where you learn. What happened is, everyone was pretty funny and interesting people, but you do that first gig and you feel good, and then you die a lot, and some people can't come back from that, which I totally respect, because I think there's an element of masochism to this. Like, if you can go through this horrific thing and go, oh, I'll do it again, most people can't, because they have healthy self-esteem.
It's tough to even explain to people. It's like I think I saw somebody on television once just say, oh yeah, and the gig was terrible, and my mother turned to him, do you have bad gigs? Like, yeah. Well, why do you do it then? It's like,
and I don't blame people for thinking that, because I often think, why am I doing this? But you go back, and that's I purely think that's the difference. The difference between me and the other people I've got is that they're all funny, good people, but I don't think they like this dying. I didn't like dying, but as in, I think they thought, oh, I'm never doing that again.
It wasn't worth going through that to get it when it goes well. Yeah. I guess when you're teaching 20 people how to do a gig, and as a graduation gig, was it a lot of we all kind of in the same direction then come the gig, as in, like, I guess material, if you're all kind of following the same formula?
Oh no, it's very much like, that's what he's good at. It's very much it was so long ago, I can't remember exactly what he did, but I know that it wasn't, no one's set was the same. Okay. It was more like, there might be an exercise which is tell us a story from your past, so that's different for everyone, and it was like, write a list of, some of these things were quite good and I should probably use them now. It's like, tell us a list of things you hate, and so that would hopefully get you to go, I'm really annoyed at trains or whatever. And so everyone's set was different.
And
don't get me wrong, some people were dog shit, but I actually think most people were really good on that.
And nobody did anybody even go for a little while?
Some people did like a year, I'd say. And there's one of my favourite acts, an Irish guy called Noel Mullen, who I still force to gig. Whenever I do previews, I make him MC them, but that's about the only gig he does, and he should do more because he's fantastic, but I don't know why he doesn't do it.
Where was the gig? And when, actually, as well, roughly when?
Where was the gig? It was at the Caledonian Arms, something like that, in Chalk Farm. Room above a pub.
Okay.
Packed. Good atmosphere. I was on first. I remember him calling my name and me like seeing stars, like thinking I might pass out as I walked to the stage. Someone sent me a DVD of this gig.
No way.
Recently, yeah, I hadn't seen it. I mean,
So I guess if you've seen it recently, I have to ask, what was your opening joke?
my opening joke. Well, here's what I'll tell you. This is in no way arrogance, because what I realise is I was really good, and what I think is I'm nothing like that now. I think I've gone back.
There was a different swagger about you.
Well, it was like I was almost like a character, I suppose. I was like an angry comic, and I wasn't. But it was tight. It was a tight set. The first joke was a joke. The first joke was, so I came up looking moody. The first joke was, I think it's something like, my girlfriend left me, and my girlfriend's annoyed with me because I forgot to go to couples counselling. She said that the therapist said I was aggressive. What was it? Aggressive, paranoid, and easily distracted. And I said, fuck off, of course he says that. He says it because he fancies you. Oh, look, a dog. Something like that.
Wait, when you say that now and you realise you're here 12 years later, that's the joke that started it all. That's the joke that set the entire path in motion.
And here we are.
Yeah, you've already said that you went secretly. You didn't tell people. Did you let people know afterwards? Like
I did, yeah. Because then there's that horrible phase where you have to do gigs and you sort of need friends to come because there's no one at these gigs, which is what really cruel part of learning stand-up is your friends have to see you when you're shit.
Yeah, and they won't come back again.
Yeah, then they won't come back. Yeah. So 12 years later, they're like, "You still doing that thing?" Okay, still doing that bit about missing couples counselling.
One of your little shows.
Yeah.
Do you have any other memories of the show or the night? So you're on first, so you know.
Yeah.
You got it over and done with, and I guess you were able to.
Yeah, I
relax.
just remember it was a really good night, and also what was weird is I remember Logan Murray, who was emceeing it, say afterwards, because it was very special, genuinely. And I've watched the DVD, you watch it, it's like that was a good night, like good atmosphere, good everything. And he said that night, he said they won't, because we were split into like 4 nights because there were 20 of us, so it was like whatever, 5 people a night or whatever. And he said at the end of the night, everyone was buzzing, it was all great, and he said, they won't all be like that. And I thought, what are you talking about? Of course they will. And then I went to like the next week and it was like, oh no, it's not. Like for whatever reason, the atmosphere wasn't that great. The audience were a bit quieter. It wasn't like that night was like fucking on fire. But sometimes gigs are and sometimes they're not.
I guess when there's like literally, you know, if you've nothing to compare to that first gig,
I was just like, it must always be
anything
like
must be a bonus. And then I guess, if it's not the exact same, it's going to fall down. So was it after that gig or that night that you said, right, I'm gonna try and keep this up now? This won't just be the one for the grandkids.
Definitely, I think I went home and like booked gigs immediately because I knew I was like, oh, you got to do your 10,000 hours.
Yeah,
and I want to speed that up
as soon as possible. You mentioned the Irish. Remind me of the name.
Noel Mullen.
Any other names from the course or for that
there
gig?
was Emily Hayworth Booth. I remember them all. Ed Wilkinson, Karen Fontana, Alan Murphy. All funny people.
Sure.
But some of them like got married and have kids and like lived a normal life or real life.
We asked the opening joke. I'm gonna ask the closing joke.
Closing joke was a bit. I can't really do it on here because it was a bit physical, and it was a 2-minute bit about James Bond being. What if basically it wasn't quite like this, but the idea of it was, what if James Bond? People kept saying it was when I think Skyfall or something, and everyone's going, "Oh, James Bond's so realistic and gritty," and I was like, I don't think I think I'd pitched a script which was a realistic James Bond, and basically he does all the action stuff, and then it was like an act out of me going, "Fucking hell, did you see that? I nearly got my head blown off." And like him having a breakdown.
Yeah.
from the adrenaline of what had just happened.
Very nice. Lastly then, before we let you go, I guess a lot of people starting their first gig now. Do you reckon it's a different time for comedians now? You know, there seems to be a wave that's just non-stop at the moment of like the new and you know, it's obviously different levels, and a lot of good people are rising now, but what do you see the differences between people starting out now than maybe back 12 years ago?
I think, well, there's a few things. One is I think the standard is probably much higher than it used to be. I mean, just in Edinburgh now, every show I've seen has been fucking brilliant. I haven't seen one where I'm like, everyone's good.
Yeah.
So I suppose there's pressure on that. You've got to be. It's probably harder to be shit for a while, and there's I suppose all the fucking online stuff is confusing, and I'm never sure if you should have loads of your own. I've always resisted putting any stand up online, maybe to my detriment, because I'm always like, well, I'd rather you saw it live. It's better to be in the room. It doesn't.
Sure. Well, yeah, that's it. It works both ways. It's. You can put it online to try and attract people, or else is it putting it online and they go, well, I've seen that now. And
yeah, but maybe I'm wrong on that, because I know a lot of people do very well from using the internet with their stand-up, and I also think we're in a transitional period in terms of what's allowed, what people are uncomfortable with as an audience, and what comedy. I think it's going through a phase that it's not quite settled on yet.
Yeah,
and I think that's confusing. And I also think I remember a pattern with open spots, and I was guilty of it as well, which is that I think when most people start, instinctively they think they do really like offensive material. They'll do jokes about rape or paedophilia or something because A, I think it's out of fear, and B, it's because you go, well, I'm a comedian, I have to say the most outrageous thing.
Sure, yeah.
And
the easiest way to stand out is the shock.
Yeah. I think that happens a lot with open spots, particularly male open spots. Let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that is definitely going to be harder nowadays.
Of course, yeah.
And ill-advised.
Ill-advised,
But,
yes.
I don't know, I think...
For a greater good, I think, yes.
Yes, I would say don't do that. If you're an open spot, try not to do stuff about rape and pedos. Wait till you've got some skills if you really need to do that.
Simple advice, not just for stand-up.
Yeah.
In your everyday life. Keep the talk to a minimum.
But I think that there is definitely a shift in audience and in reaction, and I think it's I don't have the answer because I think it's not settled yet. I think it's properly happening. We're in a transition, whatever the word is. Things are changing. It's changing quite a lot, quite quickly. I don't think anyone quite knows what's there's sort of not been we do this now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you think it could be tough, like to find that settlement? Then I guess if everything's moving and I guess
maybe it will never settle. But there's people who argue that there's a lot of shows now that aren't really funny. That are all sort of about an issue, and they're not much fun. And there are people that then there are people who are going, we can't not be shocking and say stuff, because that was the whole point of comedy, was to rattle against the norm. And if the norm is we're all being very respectful, and it's difficult, it's genuinely complicated, and I don't know the answer. Let's
go back to the moments right before you go on stage.
Yeah.
Your first Logan has gone up and is emceeing. It's getting to that point now where he's about to introduce the first act. You know it's you. All the feelings going through you.
Yeah.
But if we could take you today and pull yourself back then aside, and what would you say to yourself in that moment, you think? That the hindsight advice.
What would I say to myself then? I'd say, whatever you're doing tonight, can we try and remember it? Because I don't think I do that anymore. That's what I'd say. I know maybe it's unusual, maybe it's not, and I don't want to sound arrogant, because genuinely I've had so many horrendous gigs, but that first one was great, was properly, and not even like for a first gig it was great. I was like, I was a smasher. So we got Steve Martin, Tony Law on your first gig. They all hold up. Yeah, they all hold up. But then second gig died on my ass. Third gig died on my ass.
Thanks very much for chatting about your first gig.
Hey, it was an absolute pleasure.
There we have it. Thank you so much, Brett, for joining the show. Thank you so much for all of you for listening to the show. Hopefully you didn't mind the background noises too much. It is as good as I could get it, and as brilliant as Acast can power it, which is the best it can be powered. I didn't do any of the plugs at the top of the show. I thought I'd leave them down to the end. So if you're listening now and you've made it this way through, now you know. Yes, let's subscribe on Patreon, get episodes ad-free, early and extended. And what about those bonus episodes? Oh, well, guess what? They're coming this week, baby. I promised you. They're coming. Oh, daddy, they're coming. So do that. Patreon.com/myfirstgigpod. You can follow me at Dwayne Dugan. Follow the pod at myfirstgigpod. And follow Brett online. Go watch Ted Lasso. Now, I must admit, I'll say this now. I've never watched Ted Lasso. And I'm not doing like a backhanded thing, being like, oh, thanks for being on my show, Brett. I didn't even watch your TV show. It's more of a case of like when I saw this advertised, and I remember the Jason Sudeikis skits with with Spurs, I think, as part of like, I don't know, BT Sport or something back in the day, and they were hilarious. And then when I heard a show was being made, it's like, okay, perfect. This is, a comedy sitcom about football. That's me, I have friends in comedy. I have friends who like football. It doesn't really cross over. This show crosses over. I thought it was for me. And then all my non-football fan friends were like, oh, yeah, this show is great. So therefore I don't trust it, And then I see everybody else doing everyone like the show doing so well. I'm like, oh, shit, it must be good. But I just can't bring myself to do it. And that's not to say I won't. I just need the suggestions to die and fade into the background, and then I will watch it based on my own desire to watch it. But I think if I watch it now, I'll just be taking too much. They'll be taking too much credit for it, and it's not like me and Brett's career. That's real, Whereas them taking credit for what I watch and what I enjoy, nah, not for me. Anyway, yeah. Look, is this banter good enough to justify you still listening? Of course it's not. How about we announce next week's guest and then we get on the road? Next week's guest. I'm going to do the last of my Paddy Power interviews from this year, because I do feel uncomfortable with putting out episodes being like, hey, this was recorded 47 years ago. But that's just the way this is. When it's recorded in series, sometimes we're not going to get series out. I'm looking at some here. There's some that were recorded 2-3 years ago. But look, let's get the modern ones out, because the old ones are going to be old in a year's time anyway, if I put them on season 4. So, how about next week we do the final of our Paddy Power Festival series of interviews, and it's going to be the amazing Brody Snook. So guys, tune in next week for that. Thank you for tuning in now. This has been powered by Acast. Go to acast.com and listen to all their amazing podcasts. But once you've checked out the entire back catalogue of My First Gig, for My First Gig, I've been Dwayne Dugan. You have been a pleasure. I have been cold, adrenaline and mumbly, and I apologise for nothing. Good night.
It's the My First Gig podcast. Whoa.
You've been listening to My First Gig with Dwayne Dugan on Acast. Follow online at My First Gig Pod or at Dwayne Dugan. For classic episodes, ad-free, early access and more, head to myfirstgigpod.com. This is My First Gig with Dwayne Dugan, powered by Acast. Enjoy.